Okay.
Okay. Boker Tov, everybody. As much as we can say Boker Tov on a day like this. Thank you, everybody, for coming and braving inclement weather to be here. Braving inclement weather at home to watch us on the screen. Sorry? We're davening for it. That's true. We are. The truth is, it was very interesting. At the beginning of when we started saying the Teit Ramadan, beginning of the war, there was a shayla which was asked. It was, should we still be saying it? And we can't help but think of the chayalim that are right now out there in the rain and the cold and the wind and the north and the south, everywhere. So somebody said, should we still be davening for the rain when our soldiers are out there in such conditions? The answer was yes, we should. We're not going to change it. Obviously, we daven, they have protection and they have shelter and whatever they need, but nonetheless, the Geshem is still considered a bracha when it comes. Okay, so we are on Tzurba Marabanan, volume 16, the third shir, according to the order of the book. As I've mentioned, it takes us a little bit longer, a lot of Makorot to get through. So this is in the order of the book. It is the second shir of Hadlakat Nerot. This is, I think, our fourth shir on Hilchot Hadlakat Nerot. Today we will wrap it up. There's obviously a lot more we could still talk about, but
It's almost Hanukkah.
Almost Hanukkah. We'll start with this. We'll finish with this. So last week we discussed a little bit about the location of Hadlakat Nerot. Where should one light candles in the home? Today we'll talk a bit more about where one should light candles also when one is out the home. Very common questions which come up. We did talk about last week in terms of hotels and things like that. But another common question, which is when Bnei Abayit are in different places, if a husband is away or a wife is away, one of them is in hospital, the other one's at home, or they just go away somewhere, you both go away in the same place, you both go away, each one is in a different place. Who lights candles? Where does one light candles? That's what we will discuss today, and along with some other topics as well, in terms of accepting Shabbat when one lights candles. The Minhag in Am Yisrael is that when a woman lights candles, she accepts Shabbat. Not the case for a man. So if a man is lighting the candles for whatever reason, the halakha may be a little bit different. At what point is Shabbat accepted? Is it when one lights the candles, makes the bracha, etc. So that's what we'll discuss today. Last week we mentioned as well, and I'll just say very, very briefly, we saw the different reasons for the takana of Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat. We spoke about Kavod Shabbat, spoke about Onik Shabbat, which is more related to where one eats, having those candles there as part of one's meal. There's also the idea of Shalom Bayit, which is not necessarily connected to where one eats, could be where one sleeps, so that it's not completely dark inside the home, so that one is not going to stumble and trip over, etc. And we saw how that relates to electric candles as well. Now, today, what we'll look at is the following. It's always difficult with a sugya like this. We're going to talk about the principles. The difficulty is you look in the Gemara, you look in the Rishonim, you look at the early sources that discuss one is away from home, where does one light candles? It's not laid out, perhaps in the way that we would, maybe if we were writing about it today, we would say principle A, principle B, etc. That's not the way it works in the Gemara and the Rishonim. They give us examples, they give us case studies. And from those case studies, we have to extrapolate what the principles are. So there are two famous cases brought in the Rishonim. One is in the Rabbi, one is in the Mordechai. Two very, very significant for the Rishonei Ashkenaz. And just before you read it inside, I'm going to say we're going to try and extrapolate two principles which teach us about where the candles need to be lit, who needs to light the candles, and we will see that any time when one of these principles is missing, then it would be necessary to light the candles. So let's actually start with source number 12. So on page 115 in the book, source number 12 on the top, this is the Mordechai, who writes the following. He's quoting the Maharam. Maharam was a very significant Rishon in Ashkenaz. He was the Maharam Mirottenberg, was the teacher of the Rosh, and he writes the following. Omer Maharam, the Bachurim ha'ochim lilmod chutz lebeitam. This is another question, by the way, we'll ask as well. Talk about yeshivot or dormitories. Who lights the candles there? If anyone. Bachurim ha'ochim lilmod chutz lebeitam. Do you have Bachurim who go and learn? So they're studying, they're sleeping away from home. Says the Maharam, they would be required to light Shabbat candles wherever they are, and to light with the bracha. Mishum Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat Chova, Mishum Shlom Bayit, Shlo Yikasher Ba'etz U'Ba'eved. Very interesting, this idea of Shlom Bayit, It's not necessarily even if there's anybody else there. Just for you, you should have shalom. You shouldn't be falling over the place, stumbling around in the dawn. So he says that is required. So they are required to light candles. אבל מישהו אצל אשתו אין צריך להדליק בחדרו לברך עליו, לפי שאשתו מברכת עליו בשבילו. So somebody who is, what we see from here as well, that bachurim is not necessarily referring to single bachurim. It could be those that are married and they're going out, they're sleeping out elsewhere. But he says somebody's with his wife and she is lighting candles, even if he's in a separate room, nonetheless, she lights the candles for him and recites the bracha, and that is enough. In other words, if there is what we can see here, if there's no one else lighting for them, they have the obligation to come and light the candles themselves. Now, if you look at the previous source, number 11, so going back a page, this is the Rav Yah, another one of the Rishonim. He writes like this. He says, "Karova davar beinai, the achsanai mishtatef b'pritei lener shel Shabbat, k'mo lener shel Chanukah, im lo madlikin alav b'go beiteh." Right, Mark mentioned Chanukah before. So yeah, we have this din where the Rav Yah says, based on the Gemara, which is here in source number 10. The Gemara in source number 10 talks about an achsanai regarding now Chanukah. Somebody who is a guest in somebody else's home. So the Marav Sheshit achsanai chayav b'nei Chanukah. Rabbi Zera, a guest also would have to light their Chanukah candles. Says Rabbi Zera, Mereshki avina beirav mishtataf na b'pritei b'hadei ushbiza. Rabbi Zera says originally when I was going and I was studying in the yeshiva, so I would mishtatef b'pritei, which means I would participate with a small amount of money. On top of that, the one who is the balabayit would be lighting the candles. I would not light my own independent candles, but rather I would contribute to the cost, and therefore I'm included in his lighting as well. But he says, then after I got married, after he was married, he was still sleeping in the yeshiva, but he says, after I was married, then I would not participate with this, because my wife was lighting candles on my behalf at home. So what do you see from here? See that if somebody was, in this case, okay, now Hanukkah is going to be slightly different, but he says that somebody's lighting the candles on my bath at home, my wife is lighting there, that's Ner Isha Beito, then I don't have to do anything. But if that is not the case, so I seemingly have an obligation to participate with a putah in terms of the balabait of where I am. In other words, I need to light. In this case, I'm not lighting candles because I'm included with them, but I need to be included in their lighting. So says the Rav Yah, source number 11 again, it says, Karova davar beinai, dachsanai, somebody who is a guest, somebody who's sleeping in someone else's home, mishtatef b'pritei lener shel Shabbat. Says this din of mishtatef b'pritei, that you have to participate in the lighting, is not just by Hanukkah candles, but it's by Shabbat candles as well. Unless unless someone is lighting on his behalf at home. So at first glance, it seems like this Rav Yah and this Mordechai are a little bit contradictory. The Rav Yah is saying if somebody is lighting for you at home, then you don't need to light the Shabbat candle. That's what it sounds like. Whereas the Mordechai said no. He said wherever you are, you would need to light your own. You would need to light your own candles. So how do we resolve it? The Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions. Shulchan Aruch in source number 13. Just read it, and then, like I said, we'll extrapolate the principle that comes out of it. I think it's the easiest framework in terms of understanding and going through all the other complicated cases. He says like this: those who go and are studying or in yeshiva, dormitory, etc., outside of their home, they need to light the candle with the bracha in their room. But if you're at home, even if you have a separate room, the wife is lighting there, that is sufficient. And then he says, somebody who's a guest who does not have his own room, own separate room, he also has no one lighting on his behalf at home, needs to essentially light candles, either by he needs to pay towards the host candle, and that's his way of paying. So essentially, what is being said here, and what the Achronim writes, and this is why I said in the opening, it can sound a little bit complicated. We're getting it from cases, this case, that case. What is the principle underlying all of this? Essentially, there are two components to Ner Shabbat which need to be fulfilled. One component is, and these are based on the reasons that we've said. One component is the idea of that the place where one is eating needs to be lit. The place where we have an Yisrael Shalom Bayit, it can't be dark, we need to be able to see during the meal, etc. So there is what we call a Chovat HaBayit. The home, the room in which one is eating or one is sleeping, there needs to be some form of light, needs to be some form of candles. That is one obligation. However, that is not enough. There is also a Chovat HaAdam. There is an obligation on the individual that I have to light candles, or I have to have candles lit on my behalf. So in a case, so long as both of those obligations are fulfilled, then that would be sufficient. So if somebody is away from home, one's wife has lit the candles at home, then in terms of my Chovat HaAdam, that I fulfilled that because the candles have been lit on my behalf, the candles have been lit by my wife. However, that's not sufficient for the fact that I need a Chovat HaBayit. That the fact that the candles are lit at home is very nice, and my wife and the children or whoever's there is eating are eating there in the light. Where I am, it's still dark. So if where I am now there's somebody else who has lit the candles, that's fine. But if I have a separate room, so then I have to light there, or leave an electric light on, as we discussed last week, and that would be to fulfill Chovat HaBayit. And conversely, if I'm in a place, let's say you take a single person who's staying somewhere else, so the room where you are and the room where you're eating, the Balabait has lit the candles, so Chovat HaBayit is taken care of. There's light in the room. I don't have any obligation in terms of that. However, they've lit I'm a guest. I'm from a separate household. So they've lit the candles, but I have not lit candles. Therefore, I would have to participate with them. That is this Mishtatef B'Kvutah, or to be joined as part of that household in order to fulfill the Chovat HaAdam. So those are the two components. Now, once we understand those two components, which is essentially what's being said in the Shulchan Aruch, we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah and the Biur Halacha, he spells it out. But then all the different cases, we can just plug in and we can ask ourselves, are those two components, have those been fulfilled? And that will tell us when one would need to light candles with a bracha or not. So says the Mishnah Berurah, commenting on this case of the Shulchan Aruch, source number 14, he says, again, he says it's not necessarily people who are single, could be people who are married as well. They are outside their home. Even though one's wife is lighting at home, that's not sufficient. Why? Because you have your own room, your own private room in the place where you are staying. And all the more so if he's not married, he would have to light. Okay? Continues the Biur Halacha over the page. He says, right? We saw this last week. We said you have many different rooms, you need to have candles. Again, it doesn't mean nowadays that you need to go and light the Shabbat candles, oil or the wicks in every room. One does need to ensure in the home that there is sufficient light. It can be light from the hallway, it can be light from outside, it doesn't matter. But in all the rooms, so they won't be completely pitch black. Okay. Right, if one is at home and one's wife lights in one room, it's as if you've lit the candles everywhere, and that's fine. That bracha that said with the main lighting of candles is sufficient. Right, we have another case in Halacha where we see this. Bikat chametz, you need to check in every room where it's feasible, possible that chametz was brought into. Right, sometimes people go and check in all sorts of places where they know that they've never ever brought food into a certain room. So if you have young kids at home, it doesn't apply, because if you have young kids at home, you have chametz in every room. It doesn't matter what you do. But if you have a room where you don't bring chametz, you don't need to check it. But anywhere where you might have brought chametz, etc. So you only say the bracha at the beginning, but in the first room where you stand. But that applies for all the other rooms as well. So yeah. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to Yeshiva boys where they're going to have to light it. We're going to get to that soon. If he's not at home, however, he has his own specific room. The fact that his wife lit the candle somewhere else is irrelevant. So nonetheless, one would have to lie. So again, just a summary, maybe from contemporary source, Shabbat Hilchot, source number 16. He says, "Isha מדליקה נרות שבת בחדר האוכל, מוציאה בהדלקתה גם את בני ביתה הקבועים שאינם נמצאים בבית בשבת זו, כגון כאשר הבעל נמצא בעיר אחרת, בשירות צבאי או בבית חולים." Okay, so here's the case. The wife is at home, the husband is on miluim, or he's in hospital, or he's away, wherever. So in terms of that chovat ha'adam, in terms of the individual obligation on the that's incumbent upon the person, that is the wife lighting at home, that is sufficient. Now, if the husband is somewhere else, he's eating somewhere where there are nerot Shabbat, or there's light in the room where he's sleeping, right? We said, even if that light comes from the hallway or from outside, you don't have to do anything, don't have to light any candles. There's no question. Because you fulfilled it from both perspectives. However, top of page 117. But now, if this person is away from home, is eating or sleeping alone in a certain room, there's no light there. You would need to light the candles with the bracha. Again, not for the chovat ha'adam, but because of the chovat ha'bayit. וגם כאשר הם מוזמנים לאכול בבית שבו מדליקים נרות שבת בחדר האוכל, אבל אחרי האוכל הם חוזרים בחזרה לישון שם ברוך השם, even if you're eating somewhere else, but where they do light candles, but afterwards you're going back to sleep somewhere else, that's completely dark. Again, this is not so common nowadays, because most places you go, there's some light in the hallway or whatever it is. But then you would, assuming there wasn't, have him Hadlakat Nerot bivach. Okay, in terms of soldiers on miluim, there are other questions as well. There are operational considerations. If they're in a place, would they be able to light the candles? I saw somebody asked a question a few weeks ago, which was they were able to light the candles where they were when they brought Shabbat in, but they would have to extinguish them when it got dark because it was dangerous. Could one light with the intention that one would then have to extinguish? That is a separate question. There are all sorts of interesting and challenging situations that come up in the army as well. What about, until now we've been discussing where the wife is at home and the husband is away. What if it's the other way around? What if the husband is at home and the wife is away? Maybe she's just given birth, maybe she's in hospital, something like that. By the way, it seems to be, we mentioned this once, there was a minhag, and it's not completely clear why or where it comes from, that the week after a woman had given birth, that the woman did not light candles, but the husband would light the candles that week. Some say that is the source for why you add an extra candle for every child that is born, because the woman would not light candles on that week in which the child was born, and then later on add an extra candle. Okay. Nowadays, I think that the custom is nonetheless the woman still lights the candle even after she's given birth. But if she's not at home, so she's in the hospital, etc., says source number 17. It says also Bishmat Shabbat. So he says, Isha Nesua Mushpezet Bebeit Cholim Oyoleda Netzet Bebeit Avodah V'Chadom. So a woman who is not at home for Shabbat. Mikevan Shebalehem Madlikin Nerot Shabbat B'Bracha B'Beitam. Okay, here regarding the home, so there is no question that the husband needs to light candles, because the candles need to be lit in the home. The husband, therefore, by lighting those candles at home, his wife's not there, will fulfill his personal obligation, Chovat Ha'adam, and will fulfill Chovat Habayit as well. Does the woman herself now have to light candles where she is because the husband's already lit at home? So he says, Shmirat Shabbat Hilchot. He says, Arei niftaru mechovat Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat. He says, the woman is patur. Im omnam yesh Torah b'chevan beit hacholim beit avodah. There's lights in the room where they are. Or she'ol me'il tocham b'chutz, so light from outside. So the candle's been lit at her home on her behalf. There's a light where she is. So she doesn't need to light. In bold. Mikol makom, nonetheless. Nonetheless, the custom is that a married woman would light candles wherever she is. If she lights next to a bed in the hospital, you shouldn't move the candle somewhere else. Okay, we discussed last week the problems and the challenges of where specifically one lights in a hospital. We mentioned Machon Somet have the Shabbat lights, the electric lights. That is a good solution for one who is in a hospital or something like that.
I had this here, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That I went to see in the house.
Yeah.
I think somebody lived in my house, but I did something in the hospital in the house.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what we just said. That's what we just said. That even though, again, for the woman, it is different. We're saying a man is outside. The man, ordinarily speaking, doesn't light candles anymore. So the woman lights at home. You've got light where you are. That's fine. It says even though, according to the halachic calculation, it should seem to be that the woman is exempt. Nonetheless, the fact is that the woman lights the candles for herself. It could be based on the fact that since every week the woman is the one who lights candles. So even if she's not at home, although the man is lighting candles at the house, we don't have the intent that is going to exempt the woman from lighting candles. It's still her mitzvah, and she still wants to light, and therefore she would say the bracha. Yeah. Okay. What about somebody mentioned the question of yeshivot, bnei yeshiva? So again, you have young yeshiva students who are not married, who are learning in a dormitory or wherever it is. Who lights the candles there? So we have source number 18 is Tshuvot Vanagot. This is Rav Sternberg. He says the following. He says, "Nitponen achshav. Ma'u adin b'ben yeshiva shelomed ochel v'yashen b'yeshiva v'heach hu yotzei takanat chazal v'hadlakat nerot Shabbat." One who learns, eats, and sleeps in the yeshiva, how can he fulfill the mitzvah of Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat? Okay. He assumes that, right, you're not at home, so the fact that your mother lights at home, that seems to be irrelevant. Says Rav Sternberg, not everyone agrees, but he says the fact that one can be away from home and the Baalat Habayit lights there, that only applies for husband and wife. It does not apply for the children. They would have to light separately. Rabbi Ovadia, source number 19, Chason Ovadia. בחורים פנויים שאין להם אישה, שנמצאים בישיבות, ויש להם חדר נפרד, שכל אחד יש פה 2 or 3 בחורים, depending which yeshiva you're in. He says you have 2 or 3 people sleeping in a room. You might have 5 or 6, depends what the conditions are. In any event, אף על פי שמדליקים מטעם הישיבה בחדר האוכל, so the yeshiva, certainly, somebody on behalf of the yeshiva will light in the חדר האוכל, but he says, nonetheless, חובה על הבחורים שיש להם חדר מיוחד, להדליק נרות שבת בברכה. There's Rabbi Ovadia, very interesting. He says to light candles in the room where one sleeps with a bracha. Again, all of this is obviously dependent on the regulations, not to cause fire hazards, etc. If the administration of the yeshiva and most responsible yeshiva probably would not allow candles to be lit in the room, so don't light candles in the room. We spoke about electric lights last week, etc. But he says with a bracha. He says so one of those is in the room. Yivalech biadlik. Should have in mind, he says each week you can switch who gets the chance to do it, but he says to have the light on with the bracha. Again, based on all the principles that we've seen, the fact that you need the light in the Chadar Ochel where one is eating, you need the light as well where one is sleeping. Again, the chiddush over here is that he's saying that since they are not lighting themselves individually, so even though you've got lights in the room, this is based on the source that we saw earlier, was it the Maharamah, that they've got their own special room. There they need to light with a bracha. Many other poskim will say different. Many other poskim will say no. Once you have the light, the candles being lit, the main candles in the Chadar Ochel with the bracha, that is sufficient. You should ensure there's some light in your room, right? Electric light or from the hallway, which is probably the case, but not to say a bracha on that either. You can see source number 20.
Okay,
is the,
can you look closer at the can't microphone isn't good.
I
was recording.
Okay, I hope you can hear me now. Source number 20, the Piskei Tshuvot. We won't read the whole thing inside. We'll just read maybe the last paragraph, because the general practice, I think, would be that those in yeshivot are not going to light their own candles with a bracha. As I said, the administration of the yeshiva needs to ensure that in the Chadar Ochel, somebody is lighting the candles with a bracha, and that is the common practice. But have a look at the last paragraph on page 119. He says, we see the Bachurim are not lighting Shabbos candles, not like Rabbi Ovadia said. Habachurim shesmuchim al shulchan bal habayit shel hayeshiva. Right? They are considered just the same way that a child would not light candles in one's home because one's mother is lighting, and they are samuch al shulchan. They are essentially reliant. They are part of that household. So to an yeshiva, where you're dependent on the yeshiva for food and all your basic needs, you are part of that, right, is lighting in the Chadar Ochel. Yotzim bezeh, one would be fulfill the obligation in that way. Right, even though they're sleeping somewhere else, all the more so when there is light from the corridors, electric light, and that is sufficient. Okay, so that is some of the, we understand the two main principles. Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat always has to be fulfilled. Chovat Adam and Chovat Habayit. We've seen some of the most common cases in terms of where one would light in these different scenarios. Okay. Any other questions on that before we move on? Okay. So page 120, a very interesting shaila which is discussed by the Achronim, which is the following. Let's say, for whatever reason, one was unable to light candles. Gets to Shkia, there was an emergency, Erev Shabbat, whatever it was, and one didn't manage to light the Shabbat candles. Is there a way to rectify this? So the Magen Avraham, it's a fascinating ruling of Rav Meir ben Baruch Halevi of Vienna, and he says the following. Magen Avraham, source number 21. Magen Avraham is one of the Achronim, one of the significant commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim, and he says like this: Katav Ma'alash b'shem Ma'alamza. Kshesh chuppah me'erev Shabbat. This was the case in their days. I think we mentioned as well that they used to do weddings on Friday. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about could you have a seudah? Could you have a large meal on Erev Shabbat, on Friday morning, Friday afternoon? Is that disrespectful towards Shabbat? That's not what was done in the olden days. In the olden days, the wedding was done on Friday. The meal, the Seudat Shabbat, was the Seudat Chatzonah. People couldn't afford to have two separate meals. But so that's what was done. So let's say there's a chuppah on Friday, and it gets very late. It's after Shkia. The woman does not want to accept Shabbat before the wedding. Whatever the case is, things got very late. There wasn't time to light candles before Shkia. So he says like this: Tomar akum laadlik achar chuppah v'tavarech adkan. It says, in that case, ask a non-Jew to light the candle on your behalf, and you say the bracha. So listen to what's going on. After Shkia, so this is the time now, it's Bein HaShmashot. Bein HaShmashot is the time which is after sunset, before nightfall. It's inherently a safek. We're not sure if it's day, or we're not sure if it's night. So we have to treat it stringently in both regards. If we would say, then this is why. When it comes to Kriyat Shema, for example, we can only say Kriyat Shema after nightfall, because in case the time between Shkia and nightfall is day. However, if you say the time between Shkia and nightfall is night, that means Shabbat begins already at sunset. So we certainly can't do Melacha. Next year we'll talk about Tosefet Shabbat. Talk about when we accept Shabbat. Does it have to be before sunset, etc. But so one cannot do Melacha at that time. So ask a non-Jew to light the candle. That in itself is not such a chiddush, because it's a tzorech mitzvah, and Chazal said that Bein HaShmashot, but the prohibition of asking a non-Jew to perform malacha is rabbinic, and Chazal said that does not apply if it's certainly for a tzorech mitzvah during Bein HaShmashot. After before nightfall, one can ask a non-Jew to do malacha if it's needed for a mitzvah purpose. The chiddush, what?
You can't go into thinking that.
No. But if one is in that situation and one needs to, then one can. But the chiddush is even to say the bracha. How can I say a bracha over lighting candles when it's a non-Jew who's lighting the candle? And we'll see the Achronim have a big discussion here. He says, Tamuau, says the Magen Avraham, it's very strange. The bracha is not on the candle that is lit. We discussed what's the mitzvah. Is it lighting the candle, having the candle lit? But certainly the bracha is when you fulfill the mitzvah, when you light the candle. Okay, Ben Mashot, they said it's okay. On to the next page. So amazingly, says the Magen Avraham, that you can, but he says you can rely on this. I'm accepting this ruling as a matter of practical halakha. One was unable to, one forgot. You can, after Shkia, have a non-Jew light the candles and you say the bracha. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger is not so pleased about this. Source number 22. He says, this is difficult. Why? He says, what are you going to say? How does this work? What is the halachic mechanism by which I get somebody else to light the candle on my behalf so I can say the bracha? You'll tell me they're your shaliach. We know that in halakha we have a concept of shlichut. Shlichut only works if my shaliach is also obligated. If the shaliach is also Jewish. If the shaliach is not Jewish, there's no shlichut.
If I give my shaliach non-Jew money to go put into a pushka to get tzedakah, there's no bracha on tzedakah, so that's a different category than where you have to make a bracha. That is a different category. Yeah, we're dealing with where also again the major difficulty here is in saying the bracha. The truth is that you have a bit of a memanach shafia, because if you say that the person is my shaliach, well, I'm not allowed to do malacha. How can I let them do malacha on my behalf? Then that's a problem of the shlichut. If you say they're not my shaliach, well, how can I say the bracha? Okay, so he says a different solution that one should light beforehand and say they're not accepting Shabbat, etc. But this is the now the Machaneh Ephraim. There's another one of the Achronim here. He gives a slightly different answer. He says the following. If you turn over the page, we'll just read the parts which are in bold. He says, he says that, again, shlichut, we could stand here for months, we could stand here for years, giving shirim about the gather of shlichut and how it works, and which mitzvah applies to and it doesn't, and how it works. What is the mechanism? I'm not going to go into all the details now. Let's just say there are certain mitzvot whereby what I'm interested in is the action. It's the chovat haguf, that it's incumbent upon me to perform a certain action. And there are certain mitzvot where I'm not interested as much in the action, but it's about the result, about having it there. One of the examples he gives is ma'akeh. A person has a roof, has to have a ma'akeh, has to have a fence around one's roof so that nobody should fall off. Okay, is the point of having a ma'akeh so that no one should fall off. It's not about the action of building the ma'akeh, it's about having the result. So he says, I don't need a shaliach to build the ma'akeh. I need that result to be achieved. Whatever is done. Somebody came along and built the ma'akeh. Even if I didn't know about it, it's valid. In a case like that, then it doesn't matter who did it, a Jew, a non-Jew, somebody who's obligated, not obligated. I needed the result to be achieved, the result is achieved. So he says, maybe we could say the same thing by the candle. The result has been achieved by having the candle lit, and therefore that's sufficient. If you just have a look at this box, on the bottom of page 122, it says, in practice, contemporary poskim rule that one may ask a non-Jew to light 2 Shabbat candles during Ben Hashmashot, but again, all of this is b'diavad, of course, but without reciting a bracha. In practical terms, you would not recite a bracha on this. Again, one should plan one's Erev Shabbat well, so that one does not have to rely on solutions such as this. But that is what we say. There's further eon in the book, page 135. There's a whole discussion of different opinions, how this works. You can have a look at that if you are interested. Okay, let's just talk about now accepting Shabbat when one lights the candles. So, and as I said, there would be a difference here between men and women who are lighting. Page 123. Source number 24 is the Bahag, the Baal Halachot Gedolot, one of the Rishonim. He writes the following. We're going back to Hanukkah. He says, Heicha dabaya adluka ner Hanukkah v'ner Shabbat. Right? When you have to light ner Hanukkah and ner Shabbat. The Gemara says ner Shabbat kodem, mishum shlom bayit. Says ner Shabbat comes first. That means if you're only able to light one of the two. But when you're able to light both of them, which one do you do? Which one do you light first? He says, Bereisha, and this is our practice, Bereisha madlik to Chanukah. You first light Chanukah. Even though that's not so straightforward, because you don't light Chanukah candles during the day. You're lighting the Chanukah candles for Shabbat, for Friday night. So how can you light the candles earlier? Vada madlik to Shabbat. But he says you have to light Chanukah first and then Shabbat candles. Adlik b'Shabbat, the Shabbat Bereisha, it's alein adluke the Chanukah. If you lit Shabbat candles first, you would not be allowed to light Chanukah candles. Mishum the Kibla Shabbat.
The wife is lighting Hanukkah candles. I like the. I'm sorry. He lights the Shabbos candles. I like the Hanukkah candles. So I haven't accepted Shabbat on myself yet. So I should be able to do that.
Interesting question. We're going to talk next week about at what point when one accepts Shabbat, etc. But the problem is, your wife also has an obligation to light Hanukkah candles, meaning it's the obligation of the household. So you're lighting on her behalf as well. So you have a problem. If she's lit Shabbat candles, she's accepted Shabbat, and she would therefore not have fulfilled the mitzvah of Hanukkah candles on that day. So you would have to light the Hanukkah candles first on behalf of the household, and only then can she light Shabbat. That's exactly the point that he's making. Because once we light the Shabbat candles for whoever's lit them, right, you've accepted Shabbat. Yeah, we get into a wider discussion in terms of if one member of the household has accepted Shabbat, has the other accepted? Where does this happen? When a wife has lit candles, right? Has the husband yet accepted Shabbat? Or conversely, I think we'll get to this next week as well. When we do early Shabbat in the summer, when it's very long, at the point in which, but what time does the wife have to light Shabbat candles? Do we say that at the point at which the husband accepts Shabbat in shul, say Baruch Hu, whatever it is, at that point, is the wife nigrar as well? Does she have to accept Shabbat at that point? So we'll discuss that, those questions. What's that? You hope not. Okay, we'll get there.
We're not voting on it.
So, but in any event, but what you see, what comes out of this Bahag, this is the most explicit source that says that with lighting Shabbat candles, one accepts Shabbat. It doesn't say at what point in lighting the candles. Is it when I've just lit the candles? Is it when I've said the bracha? Okay, we'll see. Now the Ramban disagrees. Ramban disagrees with the Bahag about the fact that when one has lit the candles, one has accepted Shabbat. And let's see what he says. Maybe just in bold, source number 25. It says, Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat. Im midliku mibod yom makibu Shabbat yesh b'kah. Ramban, I don't understand what you're talking about. You can't light candles on Shabbat. You can only light the candles before Shabbat. So when you've lit the candles on Erev Shabbat, right? You've not yet accepted Shabbat. Harei kadei shelo yeh tarot be'erev Shabbat oseh. In ken idlik ner shel Shabbat lo idlik ner acheret. V'adrabah. Now listen to this language of the Ramban. This language here is golden. He says, Adrabah, lo mipnei shel Shabbat shu madlik, ela mipnei she'adayin eina Shabbat madlik. You're not lighting candles because it's Shabbat. You're lighting candles because it's not yet Shabbat. That's what we just said, right? If it's Shabbat, if it's come in, if it's after Shkia, you would have to, the only thing you can do, the only recourse you have is to ask a non-Jew to light on your behalf, because you can't light candles when it's Shabbat. You can only light candles when it's not yet Shabbat. So therefore, he says the Ramban, that when one lights candles, one is not yet accepted Shabbat, and you still have time, and you can still do malacha afterwards. Have a look, just the last line on page 124. He says, Shema mina dekol ki agavna lav kabbalah v'shalei. It's not yet the acceptance of Shabbat, and it's permitted. So Shulchan Aruch in source number 26, Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. He says, Lebahag kevan shedlik ner shel Shabbat chalalav Shabbat v'nesar b'mlacha. He says, according to Bahag, once you've lit the candles, it is Shabbat. You can't perform melacha. Based on this, we find the following practice that some women have. After they've said the bracha and lit the candles, they throw the match down to the ground, and the en machabot time, don't extinguish it. It's already Shabbat. V'yesh omrim matna kodem shedlika she'ena mekabelet Shabbat ad shomar chazan baruch hu mo'il. There are those who say, according to this opinion, there are those who say that you could make it tonight. You could stipulate that you don't yet. We'll see in a moment what is considered a sufficient reason to make it tonight. To stipulate that, and usually I'm lighting candles, but not yet accepting Shabbat. And there are those who say you cannot make such a stipulation. Okay, all that is opinion number one of the Bahag.
Well, I could do that. I mean, we've had situations where you're writing at home, if you go in the morning and have to drive.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. We're going to get that. But you can see, so already it's like this. We have two opinions, first of all, whether you accept Shabbat automatically or you don't. According to the opinion that to accept Shabbat automatically with lighting, there are those who say you can make a stipulation not to, and there are those who say you can't. So one opinion and two derivatives of it. Now, the second main opinion, second paragraph, says Yesh chokim al bal halachot gedol. There are those, that's the Ramban, who disagrees with the Bahag in the first place. Says Kabbalat Shabbat's got nothing to do with lighting candles. Comes later. When you say Baruch Hu, that's when I call Poshim Malachtan. Ladidan, kevan she'atchilu mizmor shel yom Shabbat, haveke Baruch Hu ladidu. Okay. Says the Rama now. He says V'aminad. She'ota isha madleket mekabelet Shabbat b'adlaka. The practice is that when a woman lights candles, we saw there were two opinions. Says the Rama, the practice is that when a woman lights candles, she accepts Shabbat. Imlo she'nat chilai. She's not made a t'nai. This t'nai, by the way, stipulation. He says it doesn't have to be verbal, it can be in thought. Okay, this is the Ramaz Sikum. It says the woman accepts Shabbat when she lights candles. The other members of the household do not accept Shabbat at that point. So you can still drive to shul or whatever it is, if it's early enough. Okay, in terms of this Tanai, the question is, so for those who say that one, the default position now we say is that when a woman lights candles, she accepts Shabbat. By the way, it does not apply if a woman is away and the man is lighting, or the man is somewhere else and he's lighting by himself. Does not apply. Man does not by default accept Shabbat when he lights candles. So he would not actually have to make it tonight. But let's say, like you say, you're going somewhere, you want to drive after lighting candles. Can you make that? Can you make that condition? So source number 28, it says the Magen Avraham. Mikol makom niralit ein lavnot ki im letzorech. Okay, we say that since there are some opinions who say that you can make it tonight, some opinions say you can't. You shouldn't rely on this unless it is a case of need, case of great need. Now the question is, what is considered a need? Skate number 29. He says, we don't have it clearly explicit what is considered a need for this purpose. Something which is critical for the sake of Shabbat, or any mitzvah, or just anything that you're worried about. Okay, there are lenient opinions, certainly in a case of illness or something like that. So one interesting discussion the poskim have, so what if a woman wants to go and daven at the kotel on Friday night? It's a little bit far to walk both ways, so you want to drive one way, you walk back later. Is that considered a need that one can uproot, so to speak, make this condition that I am not accepting Shabbat with lighting candles, so I can get into a taxi and drive to the kotel? So Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata, source number 13, says, מהגאון רבי שלמה זלמן אוירבך זצ"ל, שמעתי, הנסיעה לכותל המערבי לא נחשבת לצורך שמותר לעשות תנאי. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, no, this is not considered a need, this is not a great need. For that, you should not rely on this, not to accept candlelighting not to accept Shabbat with candlelighting. Tzitz Eliezer, on the other hand, of Oldenburg, says yes. 31, he says, אם כן, אם הליכה לאיזה חופה בעיר, סוברים אדם חיים והגון רבי עקיבא עגל, שנקרא זה לצורך שתוכל להתנות עליה. Let's say you're invited to a wedding Suda, Sheva Bachot, whatever it is. In order to get there for the Sudat Shabbat, you have to drive. That's a need. You can make the condition. says Mikol Sheken Kal V'chomer Yesh Lomar She'Halicha LeKotel HaMa'aravi Nikol HaTzorach. Going daven at the Kotel, Kabbalat Shabbat, of course, he says that's a need. Tuchel Shapir L'Adon Mishum Kach Alea B'Oto Erev Shabbat. And he says you could. Okay, so that is a disagreement amongst the contemporary poskim. Now, as I mentioned, there's a question here in terms of precisely at what point does this Kabbalat Shabbat take place? Is it when one says the bracha, or is it when one says when one actually lights the candles? And this is going to be enough kamina. We know normally whatever mitzvah we fulfill, we say the bracha over la'asiyatam. Now we always say the bracha just before we fulfill the mitzvah. If it is a continuous mitzvah, we can still say the bracha after we've begun to fulfill it if we need to. But generally speaking, we try and say the bracha beforehand. That's why on Sukkot, for example, we take the Arba Minim, we hold the etrog the wrong way around so that we've not yet fulfilled the mitzvah, say the bracha, immediately turn it over. But the bracha we do before Tkiyat Shofar, we say the bracha and then we start to blow the shofar, tefillin, whatever it is. Netilat Yadayim is not a good example. But anyway. So over here you would expect, therefore, that we would hold the match, we would say the bracha, and then light the candles. Say bracha ve'lasiyatan. Problem is that if you have accepted Shabbat, when you say the bracha, you then can't light the candles. So that is the source of Mari, while source number 32. He says, Mikzat nashim noagin shemadlikim hanerot ve'achar kach mesimim yadayim purusot neged hanerot ve'az mevachim ve'achar kach mesalkim yadayim. He says, many women have the custom to light the candles and then to take their hands, right, cover their eyes or cover the lights of the candles, then make the bracha and then remove the hands. This is in order that it should still be over siatam. Why? Because you've lit the candles, but you're not yet getting benefit from the candles. So because real over siatam would be before we light the candles. We can't do that because that's an acceptance of Shabbat. So therefore, one covers one's eyes, and only then would one then one would say the bracha. By the way, this is enough kamina as well. If a man is lighting the candles, so he should, since we say that a man does not automatically accept Shabbat when lighting candles, the man should say the bracha first and then light the candles. But that would not be the case. That would not be the case for women. The Mepharshim, it's not brought in here. Mepharshim also discussed the case of Yom Tov. What happens? Because on Yom Tov you are allowed to light candles, right, from a pre-existing flame. So on Yom Tov, when one is holding the match in one's hand, one could then say the bracha and then light. So there are those poskim who say that on Yom Tov you should do it differently. Other poskim say no, we say lo plug. That's going to get very, very confusing. Right, oftentimes these kind of things a person does, it's a bit of a muscle memory that's involved. You do it by habit, you do it by rote, you're not thinking about it. So you say the bracha. You don't. If a woman's going to have to think every time, is it Shabbat? Is it Yom Tov? I'm going to come, especially if you have a 3-day Yom Tov and things like that. So then what's going to happen is that on Yom Tov, so you're saying the bracha first, so then you come to Shabbat and you say the bracha first, but then you want to light the candles. So in order to avoid that confusion, there are those poskim who say that we should not make a difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov. Bottom line is, a woman should continue to follow whatever her minhag is. As we spoke about last week, now Shabbat, Shalom Bayit. Now is not the place to start intervening and start changing minhagim. One other point, in terms of extinguishing the match after one is lit. So see page 128 at the very bottom of the page. It says we saw above in the words of the Shulchan Aruch that based on the view of Bahag, some women avoid extinguishing the match after lighting candles. However, the Aruch HaShulchan writes that those who recite the bracha after lighting may extinguish the match. Again, for those who say that's going according to Shulchan Aruch, because there are those who say that the acceptance of Shabbat takes place not with the bracha but with the lighting of the candles. So if that's the case, then there'd be no problem to say the bracha first and then light. According to the Ramah, according to Ashkenazim, where we say that the bracha is where one accepts Shabbat, not the act of lighting. So says the Aruch HaShulchan as follows, source number 35. Katav Rabbeinu Beit Yosef. שמפני זה נוהגות קצת נשים שאחר שהדליקו את הנרות בברכה משליכות לארץ הפתילה שבידן. This is what we saw, that after lighting with a bracha, one then throws the match down. ואין מרות אותן, don't extinguish, עד כאן השונה. ונראה, That custom applies to those who say the bracha before lighting. If you are saying the bracha after you light, well, then there's no problem extinguishing the match. So long as you extinguish the match before the bracha. That's obvious. If you don't accept Shabbat until the bracha, so light the candles, extinguish the match, and then you can say the bracha. He writes in the last line, He says that is the minhag, and there is no questioning this. Of course, therefore, that means that there are people who question it, but that is a side point. So that is the summary in terms of, you can see this chart here on page 129, just to summarize what we've said. Does one automatically accept Shabbat when lighting candles? So we saw that is a machloket in the Rishonim. The Bahag says yes, the Ramban says no. Didn't see it inside, but based on the Ramban, who says that one does not automatically accept Shabbat, that was the second opinion for the Shulchan Aruch, says Rav Ovadia that Sfardim follow that position, and therefore one could say the bracha before lighting, and then have in mind only to accept Shabbat after the candles have been lit. However, the Ashkenazi practice, as we saw, follows the Bahag, and the truth is that there are many Sfardim who follow the Bahag as well. So have a look on the left-hand side. It says, as reciting the bracha constitutes the acceptance of Shabbat, according to these sources. One should light candles before the bracha. Okay, and that's what the Aruch HaShulchan told us, that if one is only saying the bracha after lighting candles, then one could extinguish the match first before the bracha. Within that opinion, there are those who say that only that it's the lighting that's the acceptance of Shabbat, not the bracha, and therefore one should drop the match. So essentially, three positions. Either we say that lighting candles has nothing to do with accepting Shabbat automatically, or we say that the act of lighting the candle itself is the acceptance of Shabbat, or we say that reciting the bracha is the acceptance of Shabbat. As I said, that last position is probably the most mainstream amongst the Ashkenazim. Again, all of that is when a woman is lighting; when a man is lighting, that would not apply. Okay, Adkan. That concludes our discussion of Hilchot Hadlakat Nerot. Of course, as I said, there are many more details, but I think we've done a nice overview of the reasons, the places, the timings, etc. Next week, Bezrat Hashem will continue in terms of Tosefet Shabbat, accepting Shabbat. Can one who has accepted Shabbat ask somebody else who has not accepted Shabbat to perform Malachah on his behalf, etc.? That will be the way for the next year. And thank you again, everybody.